I watched the Panorama documentary last night and had a visit to Isam saying that this is but like a brief summary of what is happening on the ground. I don't really feel like talking today. I'm really moved to silence, and I would prefer to either be there with the women affected or just to shut up and take part in vigils. In my talk, I will give a short account of my understanding of the causes of the conflict in Darfur and its gender dimensions that are manifested in the excessive use of gender-based violence against women, an issue that Benedicte, who has been there and interviewed women, will address in detail. And then I will provide recommendations for the short and long terms. Of course, I will be speaking from the vantage point of a Northern Sudanese exiled woman who has had some access to education. Although I have not been affected by war in the same way the women in Darfur have been affected, I fully identify with the women there, and I believe that as a Sudanese and as a woman, I have vested interest in the stop of the atrocities taking place in Darfur right now. My vantage point, as has been argued by Patricia Hill Collins, suggests an unfinished but not an irrelevant perspective to the conflict and to what women are experiencing. I want to start with excerpts from the testimony of a 16-year-old woman from West Darfur, interviewed by NSF. I quote her here. One day in March 2004, I was collecting firewood for my family when 3 armed men on camels came and surrounded me. They held me down, tied my hands, and raped me one after the other. When I arrived home, I told my family what happened. They threw me out of the home, and I had to build my own hut away from them. I was engaged to a man, and I was so much looking forward to getting married. After I got raped, he did not want to marry me and broke off the engagement because he said that I was now disgraced and spoiled. When I was 8 months pregnant from the rape, the police came to my hut and forced me with their guns to go to the police station. They asked me questions, so I told them that I had been raped. They told me that as I was not married, I would deliver this baby illegally. They whipped me on the chest and back and put me in jail. There were other women in jail who had the same story. I stayed 10 days in jail, and now I still have to pay the fine, 20,000 Sudanese dinars. This story, this is one testimony, and it indicates clearly the complex ways in which multiple actors, the government of Sudan and the Janjaweed, male relatives, institutions such as police and family, dominant division of labor, and local beliefs about honor work together to subjugate women in the conflict in Darfur. I believe that the conflict in Darfur is rooted in the continuous and deliberate marginalization of the region by central governments in Khartoum since Sudan obtained political independence in 1956. The Janjaweed militias did not come out of the blue in 2002 and 2003. In the 1980s, the then democratic government utilized ethnic and tribal differences in Darfur, as well as conflict over scarce resources between nomad and sedentary groups, and this has been referred to by a number of writers and academics on Sudan. In its quest to destroy the Sudan People's Liberation Army at the time, and the conflict escalated, of course, as the peace negotiations between the government of Sudan and the SPLMA were being negotiated and were progressing, as was mentioned yesterday. Marginalization in Darfur has affected men and women in disproportionate ways given the dominant gender relations in the region and in the country at large. Although earlier studies conducted by people like Samir Nagar, Alawiya Saleh, Hall, and Amin, and Farah have indicated that women in Darfur constitute one of the most economically active categories in Sudan compared to women in other parts of the Sudan. Women in the region have historically endured multiple forms of marginalization as women and as people of Darfur. So, for example, in terms of access to political and economic resources that are being asked for by the fighters in the SLA and other groups now, they have been affected in a double manner. Also, they did not have access to basic rights, the right to education, health, of course, food at various intervals, and shelter. So the issues that are raised by the SLA and other groups are gendered and should be approached as such. The same has happened in southern Sudan and the Nuba Mountains. Women in Darfur have been used as tools of ethnic cleansing and are being used as tools of ethnic cleansing. And more than any other conflict in Sudan, because the atrocities took place really in a very short span of time compared to the conflict in the south, for example. The atrocities committed by the government and the Janjaweed in Darfur on a large scale and in a short period of time have shown clearly how gender and race should be central to any understanding of conflict. The important things to consider here is that women are often constructed and considered as markers of ethnic and racial boundaries, and as reproducers of these boundaries, both biologically, giving birth to children, and culturally as well. And as markers of ethnic boundaries, they embody the honor of the tribe. For example, a study that was written in 1995, the research by Byrne, I quote, "The holding of women as symbolic bearers of caste, ethnic, or national identity can expose them to the risk of attack. The widespread rape in times of conflict has been seen as directly related to the position of women in communities as bearers of cultural identity. The rape of women in conflict situations is intended not only as a violence against women, but as an act of aggression against a nation or a community. This has been the case in the south, Nuba Mountains, and now it's the case in Darfur. And it happened in other parts of the world, of course. This practice is also rooted in the dominant ideology of the exclusion of the other, and in the prevalence of sexism and racism in Sudanese societies. It is rooted in the fact that, according to dominant discourses in Sudan, some people are considered as less human than others, and as such, they are not equal in terms of access to rights. This is the dominant ideology, really. And we need to look at that very seriously. It has got very drastic effects on the women who are experiencing the violence, to their children and families, to the community at large, but it is going to have very drastic effects on our future as a Sudanese nation as well, what is happening in Darfur at present. So I will go to recommendations. In relation to gender-based sexual violence, I think the main recommendation anyone will suggest is for the rape to stop now, for the killings to stop now, and for proper security arrangements to be provided until the atrocities stop. People who have committed the atrocities being redeployed as police and officers, and this is not acceptable, really. This should not be done, because perpetrators should not be redeployed as police officers. It is important to consider rape as a crime against humanity and as genocide, and perpetrators, of course, should be brought to justice. It's very important to ensure attention to the multiple and urgent, emotional and physical and psychological needs of the rape victims and survivors. And this includes the provision of safe space to talk about the atrocities that are happening, being interviewed by women, and also to be approached in a culturally sensitive manner. In other places, the case is different, as is the case of the woman. I talked about her story earlier. For example, when women are injured, there are 3 women in cast, and one of the women was hit on her head and started bleeding from the head, and 2 women were raped, and the woman who was hit on the head was taken to the clinic, whereas the 2 women who had been raped had been actually tended to within the community itself. So sometimes women do not seek help. And that is because of the stigma associated with rape. It's important also to address the specific reproductive and sexual health needs, particularly regarding sexually transmitted diseases and HIV, and to recognize the importance of HIV as related to human security issues, as outlined in the UN Security Council Resolution 1308 of 2000. And it's important to ensure adequate education, awareness raising, prevention and treatment on HIV and AIDS, especially as connected to gender-based violence. And of course, I'm quoting the recommendations from the Sudanese Women's Priorities Conference. It's important to work with the local community to address issues around stigma and discrimination against rape victims, and the responses have varied. For example, in the Jenaina area, women who have been raped have been accepted into the community because this is not considered their fault. In one of the camps, actually, some of the women said that they do not know what is the community response going to be regarding the children of the Janjaweed when they are born. And if we look at conflicts, and that some of the women who have given birth were refused to nurse their children. If we look at the case of Rwanda, some rape survivors have abandoned their children after birth or refused to nurse them. And in the south, incidents of infanticide have been recorded.